The day I had 160 people stand up and applaud to honor my 30 years as a metal waste handler. The day the union called me the backbone of the yard. The day my coworkers hugged me and said, "You're the reason this place still exists." That was the exact day my wife stepped onto the stage, yanked the mic, slapped an envelope of divorce papers right in the middle of my retirement cake, and carved out each word like a blade. After 30 years living with a man who always reeks of garbage, I want to leave and start a new life. And the part that cut deepest? My two kids stood right behind her, nodding. One of them was live streaming and telling thousands of viewers. Mom finally escaped the scrapyard smell. I just stood there in the harsh lights and the whispers spreading like an oil slick, and realized some wounds don't need blood to hurt like suffocation. If you've ever been humiliated by someone you loved, ever been treated like a discard in front of a crowd, leave a single period, so I know you're still here with me. If you believe that silence at the right moment can be stronger than 100 screams, that some people live all their lives, but when needed, stand taller than anyone. Thank you sincerely for stepping into this story from its very first second. I spent nearly 30 years living with the clatter of falling metal, the growl of hydraulic presses, and the smell of grease soaked into every layer of my clothes. To others, Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility was just a massive recycling yard filled with what the world had already thrown away. But to me, it fed my family, paid for both my kids' college tuition, and was the place where I learned a sentence I never forgot. Steel doesn't lie. People do. That morning was no different from tens of thousands of other mornings. Cold wind from the great Miami River blew through, carrying dampness and the scent of old metal. The sun hadn't risen past the factory roof on the east side, yet the yard was already dotted with sparks from arc welders. My crew was working the magnet cranes, lifting piles of scrap as if they weighed less than their own lives. I walked through the gate, my steel toe boots sinking slightly into that familiar layer of metallic dust. The young workers lifted their hands to greet me, their voices louder than the shredder, screaming from the light steel line. "Morning, Mr. Brantley." "Sir, watch the forklift backing up." I nodded, answering each of them. No big speeches needed. They knew I respected what they did, a job the world never celebrates. But without it, the whole city would drown in metal waste. I'd been the foreman here for 30 years, long enough to call all these noises the steady breath of my life. But the cruelest irony was, the very people I had raised with these grease-stained hands never saw the true worth of my work. For all those years, I got used to greasy palms, to rain pounding on container walls whenever I worked night shifts, guarding the furnace. But what I never got used to was Elaine's eyes whenever someone asked what her husband did for a living. Once, at a church ladies' birthday gathering, I was standing right there, 2 steps away. But Elaine spoke like I was somewhere far off, and she was trying to explain me away. "He works at a scrapyard." Her voice dragged the words scrapyard as if it were a stain smeared across our family's pride. The women around her nodded, the kind of nod reserved for someone surviving an unfortunate situation. They never knew that the very yard they looked down on had fed my whole family for 30 years. Austin, my son I used to carry to preschool, was now 34, polished, slick, always talking about career path. I once heard him tell a friend, "My dad just does odd jobs, kind of like fixing random stuff in some warehouse." He said it to avoid admitting his father stood in a pile of scrap every day. He was ashamed of me. Jenna was different. No dancing around. Whenever she brought friends home, I barely had time to say hello before she laughed it off. "My dad sorts metal, trash. Don't mind the smell." That line hit me like a hammer to the chest. I'd gotten used to grease, to hot steel, but I never got used to my own daughter looking at me like I was another piece of scrap in the yard. One night at dinner, the barbecue I grilled, the same meal they both loved when they were little, I had just pulled out my chair when Jenna wrinkled her nose. stood up, and swapped seats to sit closer to her mother. I'm switching. The factory smell is too much. Elaine said nothing. Austin said nothing. Only the faint clink of utensils on plates filled the room, like abandoned metal echoing in the yard. I kept eating, but each bite felt like swallowing the very years I had given this family. That night, after they went upstairs and I finished cleaning the table, I returned to my garage, the one I rebuilt in 1999, with scrap panels I salvaged from the yard. I opened my steel cabinet and took out an old leather ledger, its edges worn to the point that the original color was unrecognizable. In that ledger, I recorded daily metal prices, every small bit of savings, cheap industrial land I bought over the years, slow trickles of rental income, and things no one in my family ever cared to ask about. I placed the ledger back in the drawer and locked it with an old key that only I really knew. Some secrets aren't kept to brag. They're kept to remind yourself that your life is not defined by what others think of you. That evening, I stepped into the backyard. The pile of steel I gathered to fix the gate was still there, catching the sunset in a copper-red glow so beautiful it was hard to believe it was once junk. I touched its cold surface and spoke softly, part reminder, part prophecy for everything that was about to. Come. Metal doesn't lie. People do. I had always known there were evenings when the air in the house changed before I even stepped through the doorway. That night was the same. Late autumn in Dayton was chilly, the streetlights casting long amber streaks across the yard, the kind of light that makes everything look like a picture hung slightly crooked. When I opened the door, the smell of roasted meat and rosemary drifted from the kitchen. It was a dish I liked, but it was also the dish Elaine only made when she was about to give important news, or deal a blow so sudden a man had no time to brace for it. Elaine stood with her back to me, her knife tapping in a steady rhythm on the cutting board. Austin and Jenna were already at the table, neither looking at me for more than a second. There are silences born not because people don't know what to say, but because they've already said everything to each other, just waiting for the right moment to perform it in front of you. I hung my coat, washed my hands, and sat on the old chair I built back when Jenna was in 3rd grade, the only piece in the house with the imprint of my hands on it. No one asked the usual. "How was the yard today, Dad?" No one needed to know. They glanced at one another like passing signals through their eyes. Elaine set the meat on the table and smiled, but the smile looked like its corners were being held up by an invisible thread. "Silas, tonight? The family wants to talk." I didn't respond. I cut the meat, waiting for them to expose themselves. The one most impatient always speaks first, and that night it was Jenna. "Dad," she said, her voice unnaturally calm, "I think Mom deserves a partner of equal level." I looked up. Partner of equal level. Not a phrase Jenna would ever naturally use. Clearly she was reciting someone else's lines. Austin followed up as if reading from a rehearsed script. "What we mean is, we're grown now. Mom's getting older. Everyone deserves a better life, not just rust, grease, and metal trash." I set my fork down, not hard, just enough for the metallic tap against porcelain to ring sharply, like the click of a latch on a door about to open on an uncomfortable truth. Rust, oil, metal trash. I repeated each word. No one answered. Elaine sighed as if preparing to step onto a podium and deliver a verdict the entire table had agreed upon long before. "Silas, this house is too big, too expensive," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "I think it's time you consider letting it go. Someone without a stable career. Anything big becomes a burden." "Sell the house?" I asked. Jenna nodded, her eyes carrying a small joy she tried to hide beneath a mask of moral concern. "There's no point in Dad living here. Your whole life is just the yard. Grease, scrap. Mom deserves a more spacious life, not dragged down by someone who doesn't grow." Austin folded his arms, his voice smooth like it had been pre-approved. Honestly, Dad just isn't suited for modern life. No investment sense, no long-term thinking, no vision. What's the point of keeping a big house? It just proves you're clinging to something beyond your ability. I looked at each face. The way you inspect a batch of metal parts you already know were flawed at the casting stage. Austin swallowing hard like he feared he'd spoken too fast. Jenna twisting the corner of a napkin to suppress her triumphant smile. And Elaine stepping half a pace back, letting the kids deliver the conclusion for her, gentle, but deep enough to make clear that in this house I was considered the weakest at the table. 30 years as a father had taught me I didn't need them to say the rest. They had met with an attorney, not once, several times. And tonight was merely the public rehearsal of the plan. Elaine tried to hold on to her softness. Silas, you have to admit, the factory job keeps you away from the family. I stayed silent. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. The whole room tightened like a sheet of steel heated to red. Then I spoke the one line they hadn't prepared for. Interesting, you rehearsed well. The whole table froze. Elaine blinked. Jenna flinched. Austin reddened like he'd been slapped. I continued, my voice even and cold as a hydraulic press. A lifetime around steel, I hear vibrations clearly. You only need to tap an object lightly to know it was poorly welded long before. Elaine bit her lip. Silas, don't turn this into a conflict. I'm not conflicting, I replied. I'm observing. No one spoke after that. The knife on the cutting board stopped. The whole house sank into silence, heavy as wet concrete. I stood and poured a glass of water. When I turned back, I saw Elaine doing something she had never taken the initiative to do before. Gathering her purse, checking credit cards, storing water, electricity, and insurance bills. She was beginning step 1 of every divorce playbook, seize financial control. I looked directly into Elaine's eyes. She looked away immediately. Jenna forced a smile. Don't worry, Dad. We've thought everything through. I answered softly. Yeah, I know. You've thought very carefully. That night, when the whole house shut its doors, I went down to the garage, opened the steel cabinet, took out the old leather ledger, turned to a new page. I wrote slowly, firmly. October 11th, family dinner. Rehearsal detected. Attorney involved. Financial control. Initiated by Elaine. Phase 1 confirmed. I closed the book. Not angry. Not sad. Only a cold certainty. Hard as metal in the night. If they were preparing a plan for me, I would prepare a plan for them. Some stories, if I don't tell them myself, no one would believe. A man who worked at a metal recycling yard for 30 years. A man whose family saw him as someone who knew nothing but grease, scrap, and coming home smelling like machinery, could quietly build a second life right in front of them. But the truth is, no one understands the value of metal better than the one who lives with it every day. Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility in winter is not a place meant for human beings. Wind from the Great Miami River blows through rows of containers, making each sheet of steel tremble like an old body shivering from cold. Every snowstorm turns the yard into a giant machine, waiting for a single mistake to blow. On nights like that, I didn't go home, not because I enjoyed wandering under 0-degree weather, but because I knew an old gas cylinder could become a bomb. A swollen copper coil could signal a fire. A tiny crackling sound in the wind could mean an entire row of containers going up. I walked through the yard with an old flashlight, my breath turning to pale smoke, and sometimes I asked myself if I collapsed right then, would the first one to find me be a stray cat, or these silent piles of metal? Once, around 2 a.m, I smelled a faint burnt scent, the kind others would ignore, but I stopped, listened, then ran. Nearly 40 minutes later, I found a drum of industrial waste heating up abnormally. Had I been 10 minutes later, the entire yard could have become a furnace. But the next morning when I got home, Elaine only said, "You're late again. I told you, find another job." Austin frowned at the smell of grease, Jenna took a sofa pillow outside because Dad made the living room stink. No one asked how my night went. No one asked if I was cold. No one asked if I was okay. Neglect, when it lasts long enough, stops being accidental. It becomes a kind of verdict on your worth. Those overnight shifts paid extra. Not much, but steady. Every overtime dollar became a small brick in building the second life I never bragged about, because no one ever asked. From 2009 to 2013, when the financial crisis wrecked countless families, copper prices crept up. Outsiders saw scrap. I saw opportunity. I collected copper legally by the book, sold it in small batches, and that surplus, combined with overtime, became the capital I used to buy 6 abandoned industrial lots on the edge of Dayton. Others saw tall weeds, rusty fences, and cracked concrete floors. I saw proximity to truck routes. I saw future storage yards. I rented them out for container storage. Money came in steady as a shredder, running smoothly. That money once helped Austin pay fees and helped Jenna through a career change. But if you ask my family, they'd say, "Dad, he just works down at the yard. As for finances or investments, he knows nothing." People easily call you ignorant when they've never once looked at the notebook you've held for 30 years. That afternoon, I came home early, misty rain. The door wasn't fully shut, and I heard Elaine whispering on the phone, "He's a good man, just not good enough." Good. Man. I'd heard all my life, but not good enough from the woman who lived with me for 30 years, cut straight into my chest like a steel saw. I stood on the steps, cold rain running down my collar, unable to walk in. I realized some things are colder than snow. The moment you understand the person under the same roof has never truly seen you. That night, I sat alone in the garage, in front of the old leather ledger, the only companion that knew every hour of overtime, every lot, every rental contract, and I understood the issue was never whether I did enough. The issue was that in their eyes, I was never enough, no matter what I did. And from that moment on, I quietly prepared for one day. The day the truth would be brought into the light, so they would know they had underestimated the wrong man. We often think the big life changes come with explosions, shouting, or an event big enough to shatter everything in an instant. But for me, it all began with a pastel blue polo shirt. One afternoon, Elaine walked into the house with footsteps lighter than usual. In her hand was a brand new gym bag, the zipper still shiny like it had just been pulled from its box. She hung the bag on the chair, smoothed her newly straightened hair, and spoke in a voice trying too hard to sound casual. "I joined the Riverside Pickleball Club. Brandon Keller invited me." Brandon, that name wasn't a loud noise. It just flicked into my mind, like a small pebble hitting water, but leaving ripples. I nodded, asked nothing. I had learned that sometimes asking questions too early only blinds you to answers that matter more later. From that day on, Elaine changed many things at once. Working out 7 times a week, like someone who had just rediscovered youth. Buying several neon outfits, the kind she once said, don't suit anyone except professional athletes. Her phone always face down, notifications completely off. Her hair always brushed again before she walked out the door. A strange perfume, not the one she used to wear. The strangest part was her eyes. They were brighter, but not looking at me. And stranger still was how excited she was about double pickleball practice. I didn't ask who the double partner was. I didn't need to. The answer would find me on its own. One evening, I moved Elaine's gear bag so the dog wouldn't knock over her water bottle, and a thin piece of paper slipped out. I picked it up. A receipt. Riverbend Bistro, Cincinnati dinner for 8:43 p.m. Friday. That Friday, Elaine had told me she was having dinner with Darlene, a new friend I had never once heard named in 30 years of marriage. I stared at the receipt so long that the words "dinner for 2" seemed to glow on the page. Cincinnati is nearly 90 minutes from home. No one goes that far to have dinner with a female friend, unless the person going along isn't a woman. I put the paper back in the bag, didn't say a word, didn't even breathe deep, only felt a thin coldness like fog slip under my ribs. And then, as if by deliberate coincidence, Austin and Jenna started coming by more often, unlike usual. Not to have dinner, not to check on me. They went straight into the living room and closed the door, and whispered, soft enough they thought I couldn't hear. But in a quiet house, whispers like that ring loud. How to split if... The lawyer said it has to be done before retirement. Dad's pension, who the house belongs to. Once, as I passed by, Jenna's voice slipped through the door gap. Mom, this time you have to be firm. Dad's used to living alone anyway. Cutting early will be better for you and for us. I stood still, didn't push the door, didn't ask, what are you talking about? Betrayal never begins with a scream. It begins with whispers. On Tuesday night, Elaine left her wallet on the table. When I picked it up to put away, a brand new business card slipped out. I turned it in my hand. Thick paper, raised ink, perfect square corners, the kind of card people hand over when they want to show they mean business. Burton and Chef divorce and asset division specialists in marital property. In that moment, all the scattered pieces quietly slid together, forming a complete picture. Elaine, Brandon Keller, pickleball, the Cincinnati receipt, the meetings with Austin and Jenna, the lawyer's business card. None of it was a coincidence. All of it was a plan. And that plan had begun long before I noticed. I opened the garage door and stepped into the familiar space of oil, dry wood, and cold steel, the only place in the house where I still felt like myself. I opened the steel cabinet, took out the third ledger, the one reserved for a single purpose, evidence. I wrote each line, slow and steady. Riverside Pickleball Club, new membership, Brandon Keller, contact frequency increasing, Riverbend Bistro, Cincinnati, dinner for two, Jenna and Austin, private conversations about assets, Burton and Chef business card, divorce and asset division, status, divorce conspiracy confirmed. The ink soaked into the paper, dark and cold as metal. I set the pen down. No anger, no bitterness, only a very deep clarity. I closed the ledger, the leather snapping shut like metal laid on a table. In every battle, information is more useful than confrontation. And I knew. The silent war inside my family had just begun. That afternoon, the guys in the yard dragged out a makeshift grill, built from an old barrel, a steel grate laid on top, a few bags of charcoal, and a box of the cheapest meat from the supermarket down the street. No decorations, no banner printed with "Happy Retirement," no shiny microphone, no portable speakers, and definitely no speeches written for the ceremony's sake. Just the smell of barbecue mixing with grease, a few cheap beers passed around, rough laughter after heavy shifts, and something I rarely found in my own home. Simple respect, unpainted, unrequested. Marcus, the 27-year-old kid who had only worked 2 years, always covered in metal dust but with bright eyes, slapped a hand on my shoulder, hard enough that I staggered a little. Uncle Silas, without you, this yard would be missing its backbone, he said, half joking, half true. I smiled faintly. I'm just doing my job, Marcus. He shook his head immediately, refusing that answer. Not just a job. Everyone knows in 2009 the yard almost died, and if it wasn't for you... I lifted a hand to cut him off, not because I felt embarrassed, but because that memory hit me so sharply I could almost smell the fear of that day again. A smell unlike grease, unlike burned steel, more like the smell of a company about to be chewed apart. That year, the financial crisis swept through like a slow wildfire. Factories shutting down, contracts collapsing, trucks coming in fewer and fewer, and copper prices dancing like a wild animal cornered. Rick, the owner, sat in his small office, head buried between his hands, the balance board on the wall glowing red with negatives like a summer sun trying to scorch everything. That night, he called me in. The room had only one flickering tube light, the cold beam making everyone look more exhausted. "Silas, I'm about to lose everything," he said, no pretense, no pride. "I need 60,000 to keep the yard from shutting down." 60,000. That number was the entire overtime I had saved through nearly 10 years. Those freezing steel wind nights, those early shifts held together by cheap coffee, plus the extra copper sales I stacked neatly in the old leather ledger. A sum that, if Elaine heard of it, she'd think I was telling a joke. I should have hesitated. Any ordinary man worried about finances and family would. But I was no longer the man I used to be. I had a steady cash flow from 2 storage lots behind the yard, deposits landing each month as regular as the hum of a compressor. I had savings no one in my house knew of, and more importantly, I could say yes without selling off my dignity. I looked Rick straight in the eye, the only person in nearly 3 decades who called me the backbone of this yard, instead of the guy who works there. I knew the yard better than my own house. Every path, every danger zone, every container, every steel sheet. The yard was my identity. If the yard collapsed, I knew I would lose the last thing that still felt like my value. And I knew something only people who live among metal understand. Copper doesn't stay at the bottom forever. It rebounds as steel heated to red, only to return harder. I wasn't throwing money. I was investing in the one thing I understood best. I didn't ask whether Rick's family knew. Didn't ask how badly the bank rejected him. Didn't ask if he had alternatives. I asked one question, clear as checking a weld line. If I help, what do I get? Rick lifted his head, looking at me as if seeing a sheet of steel he thought was rusted suddenly reflect sharp light under a welding lamp. 2.5% equity, he said. Not on the public books, but the contract will have signatures. Legal. Clear. I held out my hand. His hand was covered in oil. Mine was calloused. The handshake wasn't elegant, but it remains one of the most accurate decisions of my life. 2.5% of a company that survived the crisis, kept growing, expanded storage, upgraded machinery. Later, that little share became a key brick in the quiet empire my family never imagined. The farewell cookout ended when the sky had fully darkened, the air colder, the yard lights shutting off one by one until only a few dim bulbs remained like the final punctuation marks of a long chapter. I patted each of them on the back, listening to their half-jokes. "Come back and visit sometimes, Uncle." "Keep an eye on the young ones. Don't let them look down on your trade." I drove my old pickup through the gate, the rearview mirror reflecting the black steel rows behind me like the walls of another city, a city only I understood. Dayton's streetlights stretched across my windshield in orange-gold lines, looking like I was driving through the very metal beams I'd stood beside for 30 years. When I got home, the living room light was off, the driveway empty. Elaine wasn't there. I didn't need to guess. Odds were she was working on her serve at the Riverside Pickleball Club, laughing with Brandon Keller under the court lights, holding a paddle despite never being interested in any sport when she was with me. The house inside was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking like the countdown of a slow explosion. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a home resting. It was the kind of silence where the air has been sucked out, leaving only the shell of a marriage standing for appearance. I went straight to the bedroom, didn't turn on the lights. Darkness didn't bother me. I was more familiar with the dim glow of the yard than any chandelier. I bent down, slid the small rug aside, revealing a steel floor hatch I had welded 20 years ago, a detail no one in the house had ever noticed, because they had never looked at the floor long enough. I opened the floor safe with the code 214630, the day I officially began working at the yard, the day my life became welded to metal. The safe door lifted, and inside wasn't just paperwork. It was the entire story I had lived but never told. 6 title deeds for 6 industrial lots I bought when everyone else panicked and sold. 2 warehouse rental contracts with dry lines that brought in steady cash flow like a heartbeat. The 2.5% equity contract Rick signed with blue ink in 2009, the corner still marked by an old staple. 20 years of tax records sorted neatly, proving every dollar I made was legal and clean, and the thick ledger with a worn spine from being opened too many times, recording every major decision no one in my house had ever asked about. I pulled the black briefcase from under the bed, the one Elaine looked at once, and scoffed, "Why do you carry that thing? Looks like you're pretending to be a businessman in a movie." Tonight, it would not be a joke. I placed each stack of documents into the briefcase, arranged in a sequence a lawyer could understand at a glance. Assets, origins, cash flow, tax proof, and formation timeline. When the metal latch clicked shut, the sound echoed in the dark room like the final period ending 30 years of being underestimated. I lifted my head toward the mirror on the wall. The glass reflected a man with graying hair, slightly narrow shoulders, and hands cracked from long years of labor. But behind those marks I saw something even I had forgotten, a solid structure built from discipline, knowledge, calculated risk, and a great deal of silence. I smiled, slow and thin, meant for no one but myself. Tomorrow they'll lay down their cards, I thought, and I will lay down mine. The day I officially ended 30 years at Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility, the Ohio sky was strangely bright. Not the blazing kind of sunlight, but the soft, dim light of a late autumn morning, reflecting off the piles of steel stacked like old walls I'd walked past for half my life. In the yard, the union set up a long wooden table covered with a dark blue cloth, a small flag flapping hard in the wind behind it. No banner, no speakers, no grand speeches, just grease-stained faces and a kind of respect I rarely found in my own home. Harold, the union representative, opened the farewell with his familiar gravelly voice. "Today we honor a man who kept this yard standing through every storm in the market." Every gaze turned to me. I didn't speak, just stood there the same way I had stood through snowstorm nights in the yard. Harold read loudly, "Silas Brantley, 30 years, foreman, not a single fatal accident under his supervision." The workers clapped hard. Then Evans stepped forward, the young man I pulled out of a metal compressor when he was only 18. His voice shook as he recounted that night. "If Uncle Silas hadn't grabbed me, I would have lost my hand or my life." The yard went silent. Evan bowed his head. "I owe you my life." After Evan came Meyer, the tenant whose warehouse rent I reduced during COVID. He gripped my hand tightly. "My business survived because of you. I never forgot." The workers around me stepped aside, giving space, as if seeing a version of me my own family had never bothered to understand. But among the crowd were 3 people standing apart: Elaine, Austin, and Jenna. Elaine crossed her arms, looking at everything the way someone looks at something that might scuff her new shoes. Austin leaned against the car, eyes glued to his phone, smirking between texts. Jenna stood at an angle, careful not to let any worker brush against her sleeve. None of them clapped, not one. I was being honored by strangers, while my own family stood 10 steps away, as if an entire lifetime separated us. Austin stepped back to take a call. I heard every word as he spoke with a stifled laugh. "Yeah, almost done. We're putting Dad into a new phase soon. Mom needs her freedom." A sentence as light as breeze, but sharp as a steel shard. A new phase. They meant the phase of removing me from their lives. Clean, tidy, like tossing an old tool in the garage. I didn't turn around, didn't react. 30 years of presses pounding, steel dropping, wind screaming through containers had taught me this. The cruelest insults are often spoken in the smallest voice. The ceremony ended. Workers hugged me, shook my hand, left grease marks on my shirt, marks I valued more than any gift in my home. They handed me a steel badge they had cut and polished themselves. "So you remember the yard?" I held it, feeling the cold, heavy weight, realer than any well wishes my family had ever spoken. Meanwhile, Elaine turned her back and walked to the car, Austin and Jenna trailing her like they were already bored with a ceremony that, to them, meant nothing but wasted time. I stood a few minutes longer, watching the yard stretch under the afternoon light. Every pile of steel, every clang, every breath of wind said something my family never understood. Respect is earned through decency, not fancy words, and people can share a house, share a table, share a last name, and still never see you. I walked to my truck, opened the door, and squeezed the steel badge once more. It was cold, it was solid, it was honest. Unlike my family's affection, thin as paper, easy to tear, easy to wrinkle, easy to burn. I placed the steel badge in the glove compartment and closed it. The silence that followed lasted longer than I expected. My phone buzzed, a message from Harold. "Silas, remember to come early tonight. The union and the company want to hold the appreciation ceremony for you. 7:30 at Dayton Community Hall." A short message, but enough to remind me that the BBQ in the yard was only the internal farewell. The real ceremony, the event the company, the union, local guests, and people who had worked with me for decades would attend, was tonight. This was the formal ritual for someone who had given his life to this industry. I stared at the words, appreciation ceremony, and a strange feeling moved through my chest. Part of me knew they were doing what was right. Another part wasn't sure my family saw it that way. I exhaled, buckled my seatbelt, and drove out of the yard. And at exactly 7:18 p.m., I turned into the parking lot of Dayton Community Hall, just as the official invitation from the union asked. Warm yellow light spilled through the glass doors as if calling me into an appreciation ceremony. On the ceiling hung rows of teardrop-shaped bulbs. Up front, a large projector screen was running a slideshow of my years at the yard, back when my hair was still black and my sunburned face stood among mountains of scrap. The union's MC, Harold, was finishing the last lines of his speech. And today, we honor a man who spent 30 years keeping Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility safe. 160 guests all turned toward me. Applause rolled through the wooden hall like waves. The union's main camera stood on a tripod. 2 auxiliary cameras filmed close-ups, and several guests were live streaming. The hall lights shone over old photos, making it feel like my life was being projected back to me. But just as Harold prepared to invite me to the stage, everything darkened, not because the lights dimmed, because of Elaine. She shot up from the front row and walked straight onto the stage, without waiting for the MC, without caring about the program. Harold didn't even finish saying, "Ma'am, please," before she yanked the mic from his hand. She turned toward the audience, lifted her chin like this was her audition, not my retirement. She began with a smile only someone who lived with her for 3 decades would recognize, the smile she wore right before stabbing deep. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice sharp as a steel cutter. The hall fell silent. A few people, thinking it was some surprise segment, even clapped, making the moment even more distorted. Elaine set a cream-colored envelope right in the center of the retirement cake, covering the words, "Thank you, Silas," as if deliberately smothering the last gratitude the yard wanted to give me. Then she said the line I knew would live in the minds of those 160 people for years. After 30 years of sorting trash, I'm ready for a new chapter. She didn't stop there. Elaine didn't just want to insult my job. She wanted to humiliate me. "Actually," she continued, angling the mic toward the crowd like a performer, "I know everyone here appreciates Silas, and I respect that. But living with someone who always carries the smell of oil, of metal, is not as easy as people think." She looked straight down at me. "That smell has never left him." Ripples of whispers shot through the hall. Someone whispered, "Dear God, what is she doing?" A catering worker covered her mouth. Elaine stepped to the edge of the stage and pointed at me, a gesture I never thought she'd dare do in public. "You don't understand," she said louder. "For years I've had to arrange everything in the house just to avoid the smell from his job. I just want a lighter life. Less machine smell. Less heaviness." A long wow came from the back. An older woman shook her head hard. Unbelievable she'd say that in front of the kids. Elaine still wasn't done. She tilted the mic, lowered her voice, but purposely kept it loud enough for every camera. "I tried for 30 years, but some things, no matter how much you wash, never come clean." No one thought she was joking anymore. The earlier misplaced applause died instantly. No one laughed. Austin then stepped forward, grabbing the mic from Elaine as if this was his chance to shine. And as in the original script, he said, "Honestly, Dad, this might be the best day ever." But he pushed the humiliation further to match Elaine's tone. "And honestly," Austin continued, "I'm glad Mom finally gets to escape. No one wants to live forever with a trash foreman." And oh my God, burst out. Jenna was live streaming, but what she did that night was even worse than what people saw. "Guys, Mom finally free," she laughed, breathless. 30 years living with the human version of a scrapyard. Done. An older man jumped up angrily. "Enough. This is an appreciation ceremony, not?" But he was cut off by a single clap. This time not mistaken, but because someone enjoyed the drama. The solitary clap echoed, cold as a coffin lid closing. Elaine placed her hand on the envelope, leaned into the mic one last time. "Silas Brantley. These are divorce papers. I choose freedom. I choose clean. I choose a life without trash." A gasp rose from a corner. Someone dropped a wine glass. The Union camera captured everything. Me standing under the bright white lights. My shadow, long on the wooden floor like a man being publicly executed in a town square. The cake crackled softly, frosting breaking under the weight of the envelope. I stepped onto the stage. No one dared breathe. I looked at the divorce envelope covering half the words, "Thank you," as if to erase the 3 decades I had given my family. I lifted the mic. My voice was calm as cold metal, sharp enough that someone flinched. "Thank you, Elaine. This is the first time in many years you've been honest." No one in Dayton Community Hall that night knew that the moment Elaine placed the divorce envelope onto the cake was only the opening shot of a play I had written long ago. I set the microphone on the table, pulled the black briefcase onto the stage. The hall went so silent you could hear the projector's motor spinning. When I flipped the metal latch, the small click sounded like the primer to a much larger explosion. I took out the first USB and handed it to Harold. He plugged it in. The screen shifted. 160 people looked up. Elaine crossed her arms. Austin smirked. Jenna held her phone up to live stream. On the screen appeared Equity Agreement, Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility, 2009. Rick's signature, my signature, a line that made the entire hall stop. Breathing, 2.5% ownership stake. Someone gasped. "He's a hidden co-owner?" Whispers surged like an electrical short. I said nothing. I let the truth speak. Harold moved to the next slide. 6 title deeds, 2 warehouse lease contracts, bank statement videos showing rental deposits arriving steadily. Then the final number froze the room. Total monthly income, $18,900. A woman's jaw dropped. Elaine! She didn't know her husband was this wealthy. A man slammed his hand on the table. "Filing for divorce to take half, without even knowing what half is." Elaine paled. Jenna shut off her live stream. Austin swallowed hard, but I wasn't done. I nodded slightly. "Final slide, Harold." He opened the 3rd file, the receipt from Riverbend Bistro. Dinner for 2. Brandon Keller and E. Brantley. Then a photo of them standing too close on the pickleball court. Brandon's hand on Elaine's waist. The hall erupted. She really cheated? And she called his work sorting trash? Elaine trembled. Silas, it's not what you think. But before she finished, Harold accidentally clicked exactly the file I told him to. The screen jumped to a 4K video. Riverside Motel, lobby camera, PI report, 4 visits. 4 different days, 4 times Elaine walked in with Brandon. No room footage, no privacy violation, just lobby cameras, fully legal. Elaine covered her mouth, knees buckling. Someone shouted, "My God!" In front of her kids? A glass dropped. Jenna burst into tears. Austin screamed, "Mom!" Elaine collapsed into a chair, face ghost white. I stepped forward, speaking into the mic. Not loud, not angry, just sharp as steel. "Elaine, you filed for divorce to take half of what you thought I had, but you can't take what you never knew existed." I pointed to the screen. The 2.5% equity, valued at roughly $780,000. The 6 industrial lots I bought from 2009 to 2013, worth an estimated $2.46 million. The 2 rental warehouses valued around $1.1 million, generating steady income of $13,000 a month. And all of this is my separate property, meaning you won't get a single penny. My attorney will explain it to you after this meeting. The room erupted in shouts. An elderly woman whispered, trembling, "He's an actual millionaire?" A worker yelled, "Silas! Damn right!" Elaine slid to the floor, mascara smeared, hands shaking. The words she hurled at me 20 minutes earlier now slammed back into her 10 times harder. I locked the briefcase, looked straight at her. No anger, no satisfaction, just truth. This is only the beginning. The entire hall rose to its feet, cheering like thunder. And for the first time in her life, Elaine feared me. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't. When the doors of Dayton Community Hall closed behind me, a wave of cold air hit my chest like I had just walked out of an earthquake. The sharp sweetness of cake, the whispers, the white lights, all of it still clung to me like metal dust after a day of grinding steel in the yard. But I knew the thing truly shaking was all of Dayton. I hadn't walked 10 steps into the parking lot before my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, tags, shares, comments. I opened one. A video. Not some shaky phone clip someone recorded from a corner. It was footage from the union's main camera. The title had already been added by someone. "Retirement Party. Divorce Gone Wrong in Dayton. You won't believe the ending." 8 minutes long. I didn't watch it yet, but the thumbnail said enough. Elaine on stage with that knife-edged smile, Austin holding the mic, Jenna live streaming, and me under the lights, calm like an old steel pillar that never breaks. I pocketed the phone, kept walking. But only minutes later, Dayton really shook. A text from Marcus popped up. "Uncle Silas, holy God, your clip is viral." Then from the lady who runs the corner store, "Oh my God, Silas, I just watched it. I can't believe Elaine did that to you." The video spread like fire hitting wind, not just in Dayton. It landed on the Facebook page of the next town over, then Reddit, our local Ohio, then a TikTok group that reviews family drama caught on camera. By 10 p.m., the clip had 32,000 views. By midnight, it was top trending in Dayton. And with the clip came aftershocks. Mrs. Christine, the neighbor next door, blocked Elaine on Facebook. She posted a blunt status. "Some men deserve better love than that." The First Baptist Women's Ministry sent me a private message saying they stand with kindness. The gossip squad at Dayton Mall spread the news faster than wind across the yard. Elaine cheated with Brandon Keller. There's motel footage. Brandon Keller, the self-proclaimed pickleball hero, was asked by the president of Riverside Pickleball Club to take an indefinite suspension. An email went out to every member. Behavior violating community standards. I knew exactly who pushed that email, not me. The housewives who played pickleball with Elaine for 6 months. They saw everything. They knew everything. They just waited for the spark. And that night, it blew open. As for Elaine, within one evening, 4 neighbors tightened their boundaries around her, like she carried poison. Mrs. Marcy, the one who used to drink coffee with Elaine 3 times a week, stepped outside when Elaine walked by. But instead of greeting her, she just shook her head and closed the door. A single click, but it sounded like a hammer hitting a coffin lid. By 9 p.m., I got another message from an unknown number. A picture of Brandon standing outside the Riverside Club arguing with the manager. Caption, he got kicked out LOL. Dayton judged faster than any court. A public humiliation Elaine could never erase from the internet. And Austin and Jenna? I had just opened the door of my pickup when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Dad! Dad! Jenna called, voice shaking. Please, wait for us. I turned around. They ran toward me, eyes red, mascara smeared, breathing like they'd sprinted away from their own shame. Austin no longer had the smug swagger he'd worn when holding the mic on stage. Now he stood in front of me like a kid whose spine had been blown out by the wind. Dad, he tried, but his voice cracked. We didn't know it would turn into that. I looked at him, then at Jenna, hugging her phone like a lifeline, undoubtedly having just read hundreds of comments, calling her a spoiled brat, live streaming her own father's stage collapse. She sobbed, Daddy, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I raised my hand, not to comfort, to end it. My voice was low, steady, and cold as a late autumn Ohio night. Not tonight. 2 words, 2 stones, 2 verdicts. Jenna collapsed onto a bench. Austin turned away, covering his eyes like he was afraid anyone might see his late apology. I opened the truck door, got in, and closed it. No yelling, no rage, no more words. The pickup's engine trembled softly, as if it understood exactly what I had just chosen. I drove away, leaving the 2 of them somewhere in that parking lot, inside the storm they themselves summoned. And in that moment, I knew the best part of quiet justice is not when you strike back. It's when they realize what they lost. Dayton shook that night, but me? I was only getting started. The morning in Dayton, after the night the video went viral, was a soft gray, so quiet you could hear the wind brushing against the roof tiles of the Morrison and Tate Law Office. I pushed the door open, the smell of new paper, walnut wood, and white neon lights making the room feel like an operating theater. Clean, bright, and ready to cut open the truth. Elaine was already there, gripping the straps of her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white, her eyes red as if she had been crying but still trying to hold her head high. Beside her sat her attorney, Mrs. Sheff, well known in Montgomery County for extracting husband's assets. When she saw me, Elaine turned her face away. I simply nodded and sat down. My attorney, Mark Tate, didn't bother with small talk. He opened his briefcase and slid out a thick stack of documents labeled Brantley's Separate Property Analysis. He placed it on the table and turned it toward Elaine's attorney. Let's begin. Mrs. Sheff adjusted her glasses, her voice stiff. We request division of all real estate, business accounts, and the equity at Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility under marital community property law. Tate didn't react. He just opened the first page, a scanned copy of the old leather ledger, page 271, dated November the 12th, 2008. Mrs. Sheff, do you know what tracing is? She frowned. Of course I know. Tate flipped the page. The sound was faint, but in this silent room it sliced through the air like a blade. Mr. Brantley's ledger contains 20 consecutive years of entries. Every overtime payment, every legal surplus copper sale, every repair cost, every tax payment. He slid the file across the table. Pure tracing, no gaps. Elaine's fingers tightened around the chair arms. I saw her shoulders tremble. Tate opened his laptop. A spreadsheet filled the screen, each line hitting like a bullet fired with purpose. 2009, $12,400. accumulated from overtime and surplus copper sales. 2010, $18,600 from overtime plus that year's yard bonus. 2011, $21,000 left over after night shifts and warehouse rental flow. 2013, $26,300 from stable warehouse lease revenue, and so on. 6 assets, not a single dollar from the family account, not one line containing the name Elaine, not 1 year missing. Mrs. Chef exhaled sharply. We need time to review. No need. Type pushed another folder across the table. These are Mr. Brantley's 20 years of tax returns. All assets filed under the EIN of Brantley Industrial Holdings, LLC, a company he registered in 2008, a separate entity, not marital property. Elaine jolted upright in her chair as if someone had struck her from behind. A separate company? You've had your own company since 2008? I looked at her. You never asked. My voice was calm, like wind passing over cold steel. Mrs. Chef flipped through the pages, her face draining of color. Wait, the 2.5% equity? Tate handed over the contract Rick signed in 2009, along with the IRS filing Rick submitted. This equity was exchanged for Mr. Brantley's personal loan, not marital funds. It is 100% separate property. Elaine shook her head. No, that's impossible. Tate leaned back and folded his hands. Mrs. Brantley, you cannot claim property you never knew existed, never contributed to, and which is fully documented through a personal ledger and independent tax filings. Then he looked directly at Chef. With this data, if we go to court, the judgment will be even harsher. You'd advise your client to sign the agreement right now. A long silence, only the tapping of Chef's pen on the table. Then she said the sentence Elaine never imagined hearing. Your husband documented everything? Elaine sagged back in her chair, her lips pressed together as if she were trying to swallow the insults she had thrown at me in front of 160 people. Chef scribbled a few lines and pushed the settlement agreement toward her. The final ruling, 1/2 of the house, $24,700 after mortgage deduction. 1/2 of savings, $10,000. Total, $34,700. No access to the 6 lots. No access to the 2 warehouses. No access to the equity. Elaine lifted her head, eyes red, but voice trembling. Silas, you really recorded everything? I closed the folder, the crisp snap sounding exactly like a steel safe shutting. That's what a foreman does. And in that moment, I saw Elaine understand something she had never considered. She gambled her entire life against a man she never bothered to know, and lost everything. I have always believed in the old rule of metal. Its weight never disappears. It simply settles exactly where it belongs when the time comes. And in the weeks after the ruling, the weight my family once dismissed began crashing down on them instead. Elaine was the first to fall. The big house, once filled with her artificial laughter, was now only hollow noise. When the court split the assets, she had to leave the place she'd lived for nearly 30 years and move into a 1-bedroom apartment in Fairborn, a worn brick building with rusted railings and windows facing an oil-stained parking lot. On moving day, the sky was heavy with rain, water streaking down the cardboard box she held, smudging her mascara. Brandon didn't show up. In fact, Brandon disappeared just 3 days after the retirement party, the moment the video of Elaine humiliating me spread across Facebook. One single text from him. I need space, she called, texted, waited, but space was the only thing that answered her. I heard from the pickleball club that Brandon filed a request to cancel his membership that very morning. They even pinned Elaine's photo on their internal bulletin board with the caption, "Not a member anymore." Then it was Jenna's turn. The live stream from the retirement night became a meme on TikTok and Instagram Reels. The caption, "Mom Finally Free," was clipped into parody videos with mocking audio. The media company where she worked in PR saw the clip and sent a termination email immediately. This behavior does not align with our values. Jenna posted a crying status, but every comment asked, "You mocked your dad for sorting trash. Now who's cleaning up this mess?" Austin had it worse. His medical residency depended on financial support Elaine had quietly pieced together for years, now gone. The university required payment for the next term within 30 days. Austin had no money. Elaine had no money. A former colleague of his told me Austin stood in front of the school office for nearly an hour, staring at the financial hold notice, as if he never imagined life could flip that fast. In the end, he had to withdraw from residency, leaving the program he once bragged about to everyone. Dad could never understand what real work is. But real life teaches lessons no school ever will. All three of them, one by one, came to me. Elaine came first. She stood at my door, clutching her bag, eyes swollen. "Silas, I know I was wrong. I just need you to help me get back on my feet." I looked at the woman who had stood in the hall, lifted a microphone, and mocked me for sorting trash. My voice stayed calm as ever. Respect is something you build, not something you demand. She lowered her head, but I didn't open the door. 2 days later, Austin came. He didn't carry his usual arrogance, just a 34-year-old man with dark circles under his eyes and his hands stuffed inside a hoodie pocket. "Dad, I don't know what to do. I just need a little to keep going in school." I asked, "Do you remember what you said at the ceremony?" Austin froze. "That might be the best day ever." I nodded. "Good. Then live with that best day ever." Austin broke down crying. I saw his shoulders shake, but I added nothing. Finally came Jenna. She brought a cheap sandwich box, placing it on the porch like an apology offering. "Dad, I was stupid. I was wrong. I'm asking for a chance to talk." I looked at the face that live-streamed my humiliation in front of 160 people. "A chance isn't something you ask for," I said. "A chance is something you create, and you didn't create any." Jenna bit her lip, turned away, hiding her face in her scarf. 3 doors closed behind them, not because I shut them, but because they pushed themselves into that place. I wasn't happy. I wasn't hurt. I simply recognized something metal had taught me long ago. When something falls too fast, it isn't an accident. It is the consequence of a structure that failed by its own design. Dayton sunsets have a particular bronze color, a shade only people who've worked with metal long enough ever notice. It isn't gold. It isn't orange. It's the color of steel tempered at the exact right heat, sharp, deep, and silent, like a reminder that anything truly strong never needs to speak loudly. 1 year after everything collapsed and was rebuilt, I stood on the ground of the 7th industrial lot I had just purchased, looking at the newly raised warehouse still smelling of wood and metal. I hadn't bought it to rent out. I bought it to do something I once wished someone had done for me when I was young. Create a path for Dayton kids who never got a starting point. Brantley Metalwork Apprenticeship Program. The name was painted in glossy black on a steel sign. Clean, solid, not flashy, not boastful. I didn't want it to be an achievement to explain to my family, because my family was no longer a place that required explanations. I built it for people who understand the worth of work and don't fear the smell of scrap metal. The first apprentice was the young man I once pulled out of the metal compressor, now 25, with the same flicker of fear when touching machines, but also the determination I once had. When I handed him his first set of metalwork tools and his apprentice badge, he froze, then suddenly hugged me. "Uncle Silas, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't still be here." I just patted his shoulder. No one stands alone, not even metal. More workers joined each week, kids, trainees. the unemployed, even young men who had lost their way. They came to learn how to grip pliers, smooth a steel sheet, and hold their backs straight under the weight of their own lives. I saw myself in every one of them, saw all those years I stood alone in the yard in winter winds. No one in my family called to ask what the program was, and they didn't need to. They walked their path, and I walked mine. A path that didn't need apologies, didn't need making up for it, only needed truth. That evening, I returned to Dayton Metal and Recycling Facility, the place that had given me 30 years of life, and the place where I learned silence is sometimes stronger than any noise. The yard was empty, only wind threading through the scrap piles, and the familiar scent of oil lingering. I walked into the middle of the yard and looked toward the sun sinking behind old containers. The sunset swept across each slab of steel, making them glow like sheets of heated copper. I closed my eyes, breathed in metal, rust, the scent of my entire life, then said softly, not for anyone else, just for me, metal is always honest. People should learn that. And for the first time in many years, I felt myself exactly where I was meant to stand, not in the old house, not in the broken past, but here, among metal, the one thing that never lied to me. And I knew the rest of my life would be quiet, but never small. And if through this journey, even one line reminded you of yourself, one dinner where you were belittled, one moment you had to swallow silence, one time you realized the people you loved most were not on your side, leave a single period. Or if you're listening from another city, so I know someone out there has swallowed silence the same way I did. If you want to keep walking with me through stories where justice doesn't arrive through shouting, but through the calm of someone who has nothing left to prove, where the most underestimated people are the ones whose backs are straight enough to walk the entire road, hit follow and turn on notifications. Thank you, truly, for staying until the very end.